welcome to another Classic Movie Monday, and today I'm going to be looking into a 80s movie again. And this one in particular I think is rather interesting because not only did it launch a career of the main star of the film, but it also seems to, I think, hold some relevancy when it comes to comedy and um, when it comes to also this particular era that is the 80s. That movie, as you can see by the title as well as thumbnail, we're going to be discussing Beverly Hills Cop, starring the one and only Eddie Murphy. Um, Now, a lot of people remember Eddie Murphy in particular for his stand-up within the 80s. Also, his presence on Saturday Night Live was fairly significant. But this was really the film that really did launch his career. I mean, as a movie star, so to speak. Unfortunately, that career didn't really last, considering the fact that there were sequels to the Beverly Hills Cop, and also some other projects that didn't go over as well. And you'll see what I mean if you look through Eddie Murphy's library. But this one maintains its relevancy, I think, as far as a comedy is concerned, because not only do I think it's well written and well acted, but I think also the story holds up fairly well for a comedy. And for a comedy that involves Eddie Murphy and sort of his style. And also the fact that Eddie Murphy's playing a character that he encapsulates so well, I think is something that is rather unique to this film, unlike a lot of other films that he's done later on. But without further ado, let me discuss this film and what it entails. Basically, Eddie Murphy plays Axel Foley, who's sort of this foul-mouthed kind of go against the status quo cop. And one of his dear friends unfortunately ends up getting killed by some people. And this isn't really a spoiler because it happens like right in the beginning of the film, and it's pretty much what launches the plot. So basically, as a result of his friend being killed, obviously Eddie Murphy's character Axel has a at least he feels, I think, a moral obligation to figure out what ultimately happened and who is responsible. So he ends up going to Beverly Hills in order to solve this crime mystery. And basically, all of what is funny and what is, I guess you could call, somewhat action-packed ends up occurring as a result. And you will see why he needs to go to Beverly Hills if you choose to watch the film. This film in particular, I think, has a lot of nods to the 80s culture. Similar to how maybe some other films or TV shows within the past sort of reflect onto the culture. I love Lucy being a perfect example of the culture of the 50s. And this film really does encapsulate the 80s because you see people walking around in like Michael Jackson outfits. You know, you see kind of the crazy 80s style. There's the cheesy music. You know, it really brings out what people really, I guess, enjoyed within that decade. And really, Eddie Murphy's character, Axel, really does carry this film as far as a comedy is concerned, because not only is he foul-mouthed and sort of a cop on his own, so to speak, you know, he doesn't like to follow or play by anybody's rules. He also has a lot of antics to him, and you'll see how he displays those antics throughout the film. And also it has a well acted supporting cast too, I think, to back this film up on top of it. So, is it one of the I think it is one of the Eddie Murphy standouts as far as um, a film that he has been involved in, um, at least being the main character. Uh, but ultimately, that's really what this film really does boil down to. It doesn't it doesn't display itself as rather complicated, but as the plot progresses, there's little hints and twists and turns that eventually lead us to our villains. Even though the villain is kind of displayed early on, um, we do kind of uh, see how Eddie Murphy's character Axel has to jump through kind of all these hoops to convince everybody else that this guy is the killer. So that's fun to watch. And I think what I like about this film is I like that it plays with the comedy and the action fairly well. Um, Usually you don't see this kind of a film where there is as much comedy as there is um, action, um, or you usually don't see those two genres really meshed together. Or if it is meshed together, there's usually a tendency to lean one way or another. But it seems to be that this film maintains a certain graphic ness to it with its violence, but at the same time, there's all these fun little comedic moments with throughout the film that you just can't help but enjoy. And despite Axel's flaws, I think he is an overall likable character. I think you can identify with him as the person who just wants to ultimately do the right thing. Um, Even though if some of his ways might be questionable, he just does what he thinks is best. And I think that's really a good kind of quality to have. And it's kind of nice seeing a cop sort of going on the level of independent mindedness and not always going with bullet points as far as to how to complete a mission. um, and I think overall that's what really helps the film carry itself over really well. Um, and you do feel like Eddie Murphy really embraces this role. And it was really a role that I think he could really shine as the very kind of uh, rebellious, snarky, and yet at the same time, very, you know, almost a little bit childlike character with his antics, so to speak. And again, you will see these antics throughout the film if you choose to watch it. But I think that's really ultimately, though, all I can really say about this film without giving too much away. Um, is it a perfect film by any stretch of the imagination? And am I saying is this something on the caliber of Wizard of Oz or, any of these other films that I've mentioned over the course of my movie making, or excuse me, or movie reviewing, uh, YouTube making, uh, I guess you could say, existence. No, but at the same time, it is, I think, rather unique. Similar to how Planes, Trains, and Automobiles is unique as far as a comedy is concerned, because it goes beyond what we traditionally expect. And comedy is fairly difficult, I think, to do. And I think to do it on this level of, having a certain amount of intelligence to it, but at the same time, just kind of playing along with things, and not being so, I guess, kind of uptight as far as the comedy. And trying to be very intellectual, I think is rather refreshing, and I think you sort of see what I mean by that when you choose to watch the film. So, um, So yeah, it definitely does have these kinds of 80s vibes to it. So if you are a person who doesn't appreciate the culture of the 80s, then I would definitely suggest deterring yourself from this film. Um, but regardless, I think it is rather enjoyable and one of the ones that really did um, bring uh, Eddie Murphy to the spotlight. It made him tons of money when it came out. I mean, this movie was really highly ranked when it was initially there within its release, and I think it still maintains this sense of relevancy because I think people, when you think of Beverly Hills Cop, it sounds familiar. Similar to Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, it just sounds familiar. The name sort of rings a bell. Same with films like The Good, Bad, and the Ugly. They sort of they just sort of encapsulate our attention, I think. And I think it was very clever to insert the kind of Hollywood title of Beverly Hills, that I think probably suited itself well. Um, but yeah, it is really a fun film if you enjoy Eddie Murphy's style of comedy and if you enjoy the kind of wacky 80s fun and also action that surrounds it. Um, but yeah, I think that's really ultimately all I can say about this film without really giving too much away. But yeah, if there are any questions, comments, concerns, I would be more than happy to answer them. But thank you so much for watching. I hope you all have a pleasant day, week, month, and year. And I hope to see you on the next video. Take care. Bye-bye.